Hey everybody, welcome back here with my brother Ben on the Two Brothers Pod. Not sure if we have a name yet, um, but nonetheless, we're back for another episode. Ben, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Um, it seemed like we got some pretty decent feedback from the last episode, so figure we get right back on the horse and see what we can come up with this time.
Yeah, awesome. And so, kind of going off of where we ended last time, it, had a lot to do with, kind of finding like destination of something you're passionate about. And I think what something that we have also thought about in that vein, kind of revolves around the performance, right? Like if you have a goal, you're working hard, but you're not performing well. And you see that it's clearly at like the highest levels with athletes. But as non-athletes, like performance is still something that exists in our livelihood, maybe not as binary from wins and losses, but something that we can focus on. So I think kind of the theme for this podcast is going to be kind of competitiveness and performance. So just to start us off, I had this like kind of funny thought when I was thinking about what to talk about today, and it brought me to I was talking to a friend, and they asked me who's more competitive, you or your twin. As twins especially, like I feel like there's a very little more natural kind of like either kinship, but then also aggression for whatever's worth. And it's funny because I originally thought like, oh, it was me. We both played basketball in high school. I'm sure we're both very competitive. I think we both hate to lose. But now it's funny being outside of that realm, and it made me think about how I view competitiveness today. And I quickly realized that I'm not near as competitive as I once thought I was, and that Betty is far more competitive than I am. And I think part of the reason I think that is there's, competitive is like this very blanket term of kind of accountability of drive. You always hear like the Michael Jordans, the Kobe's, like they do whatever it wants, whatever it takes to win. But, stepping back now, I think it's tougher for us to kind of define what competitiveness looks like, and how we can kind of amplify our own performance, in day life in relationships. So Benny, my question is to you, do you think you're more competitive than me? And also, how do you view competitiveness? How do you view performance? And just give me your thoughts around these topics.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting way to start this out. I guess looking at competition as a whole, um, to be honest, I have an interesting point of view on this, and I think it's a very easy to look at it from a sport lens, because by nature you're going to be competing against other people. But what's interesting about competition is that by nature you're pretty much your skill level is pretty much going to be matched upon your competitors, and the reason for that is, and kind of going into your question on the two of us, I mean, I would say like we both kind of pushed each other, and I think competitiveness and wanting to be better than your competition largely results from like insecurity. And based upon that, I mean, I know when I was younger, I was incredibly insecure, which I think drove a good portion of um, my drive to improve and wanting to be better. But again, progress and improvement is kind of a chase. It's like it's a building of a self image, and that's more or less what competition is. Um, it's more or less your skill level is going to be derived by your competitors, and once you get 1 inch beyond your competitors, I think that's kind of when you let up, and it's not the most effective tool because you are always reliant upon your opponents, your competitors, to define your skill level based upon that definition.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and I do agree with you that we almost use it as a crutch somehow of kind of leveling the playing field, especially in high school sports or in something where there is, again, a very like there's a winner or a loser, right? So I'm curious your take with like, you know, we're going to keep using the sports analogy probably a lot throughout this podcast, but like looking at LeBron or Kobe, where they are so vastly superior to their quote unquote competition, yet you could tell that there was a competitive spirit in them that didn't exist in their components. So do you think that exists because they're not even worried about their opponents, or do you think they have something to prove that they are still the best?
Well, I mean, it largely depends on the individual based upon what they want to go or what they want to achieve and where they want to go. And for folks like Kobe Bryant, LeBron, Kevin Durant, some of the best players in the NBA, it's all based upon how good they wanted to see themselves become. And that's not the same for everyone. And everyone kind of has their own point of view on basically what they would like to achieve. And I think based upon, I think your question was alluding to like winning and losing. In that aspect, I mean, winning and losing, like you can have a ton of influence as an individual or as a player in a team sport for the outcome of the game. But in a lot of cases, athletes are kind of defined based upon how many games that they win, and obviously their individual statistics as well. But in a lot of cases, they don't have as much influence as you might expect for them to win the game. Of course, a player like LeBron that does everything and he's physically imposing, he might have a bigger impact than others, and so that's why he's more of a valuable player than others. But winning and losing, it's an interesting, I guess, point of discussion, because I would say for most athletes, coaches, and like management, winning is the goal, and that is the overarching theme. But I think that's largely
Well,
based upon.
they're defined as that, right? Like, go on.
Well, I mean, the reason that they're defined upon that is because winning and losing is, when you win, it kind of serves as a validation of your ego and of your kind of self-image, and it's a fragile foundation, because if you don't win, that's when you kind of lose self-confidence or you don't play well, and it's kind of a self-feeding cycle where it's not the most effective tool to build consistency and performance. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that performance and results, they're all byproducts of your breadth of work that you're performing, if that makes sense.
So are you saying to try not to define, the short-term win losses, ebbs and flows, confidence roller coaster, you know, because of these are things that are just naturally going to be on this journey, on this path of, your performance and your journey, um, that you shouldn't necessarily emphasize those? Or what's your take on kind of being able to roll with the punches, while not being, too kind of beaten down? Like, how do you, within the scope of like adversity, how do you look at, performance?
It all depends honestly on the understanding and what a person is trying to do and where he's trying to go. And I think that's kind of what we were trying to allude to in our last episode. So let me give you this is a very binary example that I like to use. If you want to be a master at your craft and be the very, very best in the world at something, if you have a bad game, like, or if you lose, like, what all does it matter? Like, the result doesn't matter, because in the end, you're going to be the best. So everyone's always going to have bad. It just happens sometimes, and the goal is to reflect upon where performance comes from, not to try to improve or do progress, because above all, mastery is finding truth in a craft. And when you're insincere and you don't find, and you're not seeking truth, that is when you're searching for improvement or progress. And it's a house of cards. Like, it has no stable foundation. And just a quick caveat here is that we kind of mentioned these things about truth and mastery and trying to be the best in the world. And by no means is that a recommendation that you need to do so. There's always an implication or something to be implied that, oh, this is the right way to do something, or this is the wrong way, avoid this. That is exactly what we were talking about with prescriptions. And everyone tries to prescriptionize things. And the implication, or what I'm trying to say, is that I'm not trying to imply anything. Being a master is not good. Being the best in the world is not good. And neither is being a couch potato. It's just a matter of what moves you as an individual and where do you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of good things there. I kind of want to unpack. I think, you know, when applied to kind of our day-to-day lives, like of people who are not athletes, clearly, who have jobs, who are still trying to figure out, themselves and like where they can marriage their passions and their work and their productivity kind of all in one. And so something that you kind of keyed in on was one bad performance or one poor result should not affect your overall line of thinking into your journey of a mastery or of a craft or of a passion. However, I think it's, suffice to say that we all kind of get in ruts sometimes. We all, just like an athlete does, goes through a bad stretch of games, goes through a bad stretch of days. How, applied within our lens of, just kind of average people, what do you think is something that like we not necessarily should or should not try to do? Um, but what do you think are some pitfalls to avoid of, or to potentially try to get out of, like when you are in a rut or when you are unconfident? I know how you feel about confidence, so we can get into that later. Um, but just give me your thoughts overall.
Yeah, again, I mean, not to like call you out here, but it is kind of like you're leading me down the path to like tell people like you should avoid doing this, you should not do this. If you want to avoid getting into a rut, do these three things, avoid these three mistakes. I'm not picking on you, but it's just like I can just see the thumbnail on YouTube of like all of these, like all the different like people that post videos on things like that. But anyways, I think it relates to answer your question. It relates to the amount of uneasiness or the level of something or the level of discomfort where it is not okay to keep going, if that makes sense. So I think pain and misery is a fun. I mean, as strange as it is to say, but I think pain and misery is a very good stimul or it's a good catalyst to propose for an internal search. And when that occurs, you kind of start reflecting on the things that are no longer okay with you to then be able to change. And those were kind of the key identifiers that we said last time of this spawns change in an individual, I believe in last episode. So it's not a recommendation, but that's usually what occurs when people want to change course.
Yeah, no, and I think that's good. And I think it is a good call out because, again, I'm just more trying to understand for, to not necessarily prescriptionize, but still understand like the underlying line of thinking of when you do kind of have, like, to your point, when you are going through a rut, like the, you do kind of just have to roll with the punches, right? Because in the long, like, length of life, like you are going to experience like many ups and downs where it really shouldn't fate. Like these things are happen or like are going to happen. When you experience like misery or adversity, it is sometimes it's not, sometimes it stinks, but sometimes it does kind of give you the impetus of like, oh, I need to change or I need to refine my focus or redefine what my focus is, or redefine what those passions are. And I think, kind of just like moving on a little bit, I think a lot of people, something that they allow this to affect is like is their confidence, right? And I know we have to, and we kind of mentioned it last podcast, and something that we've talked about at length, one on one, is kind of like this myth of confidence is that we often use labeling around how we feel to describe why we're feeling these things. And so, for example, like if you're having a presentation and it goes poorly, you're like, God, I wasn't, just wasn't very confident going in. Maybe I wasn't prepared. Um, but the fact of the matter is, like, you still were like present. Maybe you weren't as present as you should. But using confidence as this, like, I can only achieve things while I'm feeling confidence. You see this all the time with like, golfers, for example, of like, there's this podcast that came out where Brooks Koepka is like, yeah, I'm just, I can only play well when I'm confident. And it's like, well, if you only play well when you're confident, you're very in a pretty shitty negative feedback loop of, well, I'm only going to play better when I'm confident, but if I keep playing worse, I'm going to be unconfident. So trying to be like a slave to the confidence is a very unhealthy way to live your life. And trying to even attribute how you feel on a given day to confidence is equally as unhealthy. Um, just give me your thoughts around like kind of what you think about confidence at large.
Yeah, I think you gave a really good example of kind of that negative feedback loop. So in sports and with athletes, so when they perform, the common thinking with confidence is that when you perform well, or you can only play well when you are confident, and you'll play worse when you're not feeling well, or you're having bad thoughts, or you have low confidence. But what the term we like to use is you are forever a pinata to your results and to how you play. So you're just going to be going with the wind, and you're just going to be taken for a ride. And so the thing is that is how everyone views sports, and how everyone thinks you need a high amount of confidence in order to perform well. And to be like the best in the world, you need like X amount of confidence. And that's just not the case, though.
100%. And I think like, to even use like, I know we've talked about this. I think it's a really funny example where like, you see with like guys at a bar, for example, or like girls can sometimes like kind of just sniff like either confident guys or like people who are just like kind of insecure or kind of in their own head, right? But when you realize like when you are kind of just like naturally in conversation, you never think like, oh, I'm feeling confident right now, or oh, but you feel it when you're not feeling confident, right? So then you hit the bar and you grab a beer and try to get the liquid confidence. But even if you get to that point, it's not like now I am confident and now I am okay and now I am comfortable, right? So I think like trying to avoid this binary standpoint of confidence. And again, I don't want to prescriptionize here, but I think like trying to understand the myth of confidence to a certain degree, that it's never going to be, to your point, like a pinata. Like you kind of want to be malleable in certain social situations, in your work situations, in life in general, because like relying on, either God, last week I was really feeling it, or in golf I was really hitting the ball well. Why can't I do that? And then you get in your own head, right? Like the idea is to just, like I said, just be like free flowing, to be like water, and just like go with the punches and be just present, because that is your best state. It doesn't matter if you're confident or not. It matters just like how you continue and how you like you live and be present and passionate in different moments.
Yeah, let me interject here. So, of course, there was one thing we kind of didn't discuss on with the flow state and the point of no mind, and it's not a goal to achieve. I think it's more about like removing the blockages and the obstacles that are in the way in order to make the conditions ripe to be able to like play at an effortless level and to achieve that like the no mind level
Right.
of performance. But so the whole point is that confidence kind of goes hand in hand with self image. And so when you're beholden on confidence, you kind of view your own personality and your own self image in a certain way, you're always going to have deficiencies, because self image and ego, like it's never, the puzzle is never finished. You're always searching for the next best thing. That is the endless chase of improvement. That's the downward spiral. So the whole point of no mind and the flow state is that at that point in time, you have no self. Therefore, you have no deficiencies, and you are quite literally like a child at play, and you can play in any, you're free to play pretty much.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you just said there was fantastic. I think like it's funny because like what we originally started out with this too is saying like how competitiveness is almost like used to level yourself to your competitors, right? And like ego and self-image in our day-to-day lives, especially, is a factor in so many of our decisions, right? And what we do is so much defined on what the crowd thinks, or especially thinks, but what the crowd does. I'm going to do something because somebody else does something. But, and this really goes back pretty nicely to our first podcast too, is like, to remove some of these blockages where you can kind of enter this flow state. And again, it's a lot bigger process than just opening this door, right? But like, starting to sift out of the garbage is found through a lot of this reflection, or this passion, or trying to understand like the why. And I think like as you continue to do these things, and as you feel like more and more present, your priorities just naturally switch. It doesn't even have to be like this calculated decision to do something. A lot of the times, which is really like fun, and what I find interesting, I'm curious your thoughts too, is like I found myself doing habits that no one has ever told me to do before. It's just kind of like what I felt right at the time. And I think that's kind of an interesting standpoint into once you kind of have these conversations, you lose the prescriptions from anybody else, and these are things that just come very natural to you, and you just do them. You don't really think about them, and that's where when I view improvement, I don't view improvement. Oh, I'm getting better at something. It's like I just take it as it is, right? As this pinata, and I just kind of continue on the journey instead of trying to figure out like, oh, now I'm doing this, or I should be doing this, and try to just minimize that as much as possible and just kind of take in life as present as I can.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a pretty good tidbit there about like habits or something that you will stumble or notice yourself doing. Like that is pure, and that's like I think that's just a reflection of true nature, to be honest. And it's just so funny because you see so many people just follow these morning routines just because like some successful person or some guru or some meditation expert tells you. Don't even get me started on meditation, but it's like it all depends on where you're trying to go. If you just want to feel a little bit better about yourself or like have like 10 like minutes of clarity in your life, then meditation for 20 minutes might be an interesting thing. But if you want like perpetual bliss and peace, meditation's not going to get you there. And don't listen to me, just look at the evidence.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite like YouTube videos is, I don't know if you've seen it, but I mean favorite like in jest, but like have you ever seen like the graduation speech from like is this either like this military guy at the University of Texas where he's like, "Here's the 10 things you should
Yeah,
do every day," and the first one's
yeah,
like, "You should make your bed." First thing should
yeah,
do every day is make your bed because now you feel this sense of accomplishment. And I just kind of think it's this video's got like 20 million views. I've always
yeah.
thought to myself like, can you imagine the hundreds of people right now who are making their bed and don't give two shits about why they're actually doing it? And like that's what I think is just really funny is like you end up getting advice that if you don't adhere to, if it doesn't like sometimes you get something and then you're like, oh, I can take nugget of this. But like if you're just making your bed and you're like just because like some guy on the internet told you should do it to feel good about yourself, you're completely wasting your time, right? And it's like how many of those things, especially in your day to day life, I think when you kind of do some reflection, are things that you don't think about that maybe either someone told you or like you told yourself. Like, and I feel like once you kind of realize that, it's much easier to start minimizing those habits and then maximize the ones that do come natural to you.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I kind of wanted to take that point is obviously like that was a small thing where you just have like some guy mention, "Oh, I need to make my bed. Oh, I need to like go stretch out or do like 10 minutes of meditation or gratitude time, whatever the case is." But it's just a microcosm of something that happens for your entire life. And when you go down a career path or you spend your entire life doing something because that's what you believe to do, that's what like the majority of humanity does. That's society 101 is no one I mean it's just people don't have the reflection of why they're doing these things. And in order to break out of that rut, so to speak, it's again the necessary amount of internal reflection. But if you don't reach that point, usually it's pain, misery, or discomfort that forces you off your rocker to, or there's some earthquake that happens in your life that forces you to have that reflection and forces you to tell you, I can't, there's no way I can continue to be going like this. It is just not okay with me to continue living like this.
Yeah, and I think what's I feel like is an interesting like kind of that next step is like when you do kind of feel the pain or kind of the self-inflicted kick in the pants, so to speak. Um, I think a lot of people have trouble with the following step, which is kind of staying true to either their routine or habits or being accountable or trying to really, you know, garnish this like intrinsic motivation. And I think that's almost like a very lost cause of, or I think, let me say this better. I think for people who have a routine that works with them, like it works for them for a reason. But I think like trying to put yourself on being a slave to your habits or your schedule or looking for other places for self motivation, like David Goggins, I think is a great example of this, but also a very bad example of this because like I think people view him in the wrong sense. Like he's a guy who's incredibly sincere and hardworking because like that's how he's built. But I think people view him as like this motivating piece of like, oh, if he can do it, I can do it. So if he's running 5 miles, I need to run 5 miles. And it's like, no, like you should not replicate like what he does. He does what he does because that's what's natural to him. And I think looking at a guy like David Goggins or like Jocko Willick or some of like these extremely disciplined guys as motivation, like it's a very dangerous course because at a certain point, that motivation from an external source is going to run out, right? Like anything that's not sustainable is not truth. It's not something that's truly, um, you know, your passion or your being. And so I would like, not really sure where I was going with that, but I would just caution from trying to look towards other people for motivation or for accountability because those are not sustainable habits. They're not even sustainable ideas, right?
Well, I mean, because it's like it's not necessarily truth. It may be truth to those specific individuals, but there's no amount of motivation or like rah or there's nothing I can tell you to make you do something else or to get you to go the extra mile. It might help on one day, but 5 o'clock's going to come tomorrow and you're going to feel the exact same way that you felt beforehand. And again, it's a cycle. If you are beholden on motivation and all of this other nonsense to get you to the finish line, that's that in and of itself is insincere. It's not truth. And so that's just, you see, that's how the majority of people go through their lives. And that's, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've just realized that for myself, and I've tried to. I mean, of course, like, I mean, I might watch a motivational video, but it's all a reactive piece. And when you're reactive, I mean, when you spend your whole life reactive, you are just like a pinata, and you're floating in the wind, and you're just being battered by society. You're taken along for the ride for as long as you can withstand until you realize that your legs can actually hit the ground and you can figure out like what maneuvers that you want to take in life.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think, we have touched on this, but I think a lot of people, especially our age, are trying to kind of in that figure out mode, right? And I think that like the question of sincerity is tough. And I think mainly because our actions in a day-to-day life, like, I work a 9 to 5, you work a 9 to 5, like it's not what it's not what I'm truly passionate about, right? Like this is like I go through my work day and it's just kind of work. Um, so like what do you think either about, you know, either like finding for people in their day-to-day lives of like how they can kind of, and again, I don't mean this to be like too much of a prescription, but it's going to come off of like kind of not necessarily like how can they escape, not necessarily escape, but like how can they try to find things throughout their day that help, and again, that like kind of help
Here,
really like amplify their,
cut you off
yeah,
here. So, like, just to kind of go off my last statement of like, there's no amount of external things or like motivation I can tell someone, but like, the truth of the matter is, no one wants to be told that they have to change, and it's not up to me to tell someone what to do or how to live their life. Like, who cares what I say? Um, it's just it's I mean, you just it's asking a question to like make other people to feel good, and it's I mean, I'm not here to make anyone. It's not about feeling good. It's about like finding what is true and genuine for myself and for whoever who wants to find truth in themselves. And so the thing is like for me and you, it's about having an honest conversation. I'm not trying to help anyone, because
right.
the people that are truly going to be helped are the ones that take the information for their own purposes, digest it, and then figure out how they want to deploy it. And it's based upon that foundation. It's not about watering something down so the masses can then take that information to then figure out what to do with. And by that nature, when you water something down, that makes it it's a half truth that makes it therefore not true.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I do want to just bring it back to kind of performance here.
Yeah.
And I think like golf is a very fascinating kind of case study into this because, we came up in a very basketball background, in a baseball background where, you know, our performance, as much as we like to deny it, doesn't necessarily guarantee like success, right? Where as a golfer, like it's you in the course and it's your competitors, obviously, but like the pressure is all on you. Um, and so I think like golf is very fascinating to look at the psyche of how golfers kind of define success. And I know we kind of touched on this too. But I think like it's very easy to, and this isn't just like unique to golf, but kind of find excuses for your performance. But I think less so in golf because it is just more of like a solo journey. Um, so how do you view like kind of golf and like the pressure around being the only one who is to blame at the end of the day, like for not necessarily success, but for your result?
Golf is such a fascinating case study for all of like this kind of reflection and this application. And the reason being is because golf, I would say, is the only sport in the world where the best players in the world do not necessarily win out or win week in and week out. Like there's a lot of talented players and there's a lot of fluctuation with play, and it's watching that Full Swing Netflix documentary specifically. I think the one with Brooks was really fascinating. Just understand his mentality, and he would say like there was one particular moment where he was like, "I know by the fourth hole if the ball's going to be like in my favor," and I mean, not that that is a good or bad mentality, but it's again, you're just a pinata. Like it's just not an impressive. I mean, I'm going to stop myself from being like super harsh, but you're just a pinata and you are like floating in the wind based upon a certain expectation or something that you want to occur. And I think the interesting question that just to pivot a little bit in sports. So I remember talking with a friend of mine who's a professional athlete, and he would tell me about the pressures that he would have as a professional golfer, and because you are trying to make a living and your life and your paycheck is on the line. So those are very real pressures to have. But the way he explained it to me, where he gets like he might get nervous in certain situations or for like putts that he needs to make or he needs to score well, and then he kind of like spun it on me. He's like, if you have like two free throws to make in game 7 of like playoffs or whatever the case is, and you have a full arena, you're on the road, are you not going to feel pressure? And I guess the response was like, yeah, traditionally when I was younger and when I played sports, I felt the pressure, I felt the anxiety and nervousness, but like before pretty much every single game. But I think the more interesting question is, why does the nervousness and the pressure arise in the first place? And when you go down that route, you realize that you're putting emphasis on the results and on the performance, and that in and of itself, that is the inhibition to performance, is because you are trying to formulate a way to have a good result, and that in and of itself creates the anxiety. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I thought that was great. And I think like a lot of times as well, like when, especially like I remember in sports or even, if I'm like super anxious, and this kind of goes back to prescriptions, is like you'll hear things of like, here are 3 things to do to handle pressure, right? And like it's like, focus on your breathing or, aim small, like, and it's just like very acute solutions to things, right? But, and this is, in my opinion, and I know you probably agree, that when dealing with pressure, when dealing with anxiety, when dealing with nervousness, confidence, like the key is to not figure out how can I diminish this. The key is to look directly into the source of the problem, right? Of looking into why exactly do I feel pressure? Well, do I feel pressure because I need to make this putt so I can then have a paycheck so that I can pay my rent? Is it a money issue, right? Like once you really dissect like why you feel these emotions, like at the very core, not just like the outward like emission of, oh, I'm nervous because like I had a bad day at work, but like that could be it. But why'd you have a bad day? And like really trying to unpack like why you feel pressure. And I think for athletes especially, like it's very easy to label performances on those things, right? But the only way that you like over like my opinion, like overcome them or look past these things. I think look past is probably the better way of saying it, not even overcome, because these things are going to exist, right? It's not like one day you're going to get to a spot where pressure ceases to exist, where you're not going to be like slightly worried about something. Like these emotions are still going to occur, right? But the end goal is to allow them to occur very naturally and just ingest them and go on and not even think about that they're even there, right? And like that is kind of the sincerity. That is the quote unquote flow state.
Yeah, I mean, the part that I want to unpack, I mean, it was a little bit on the earlier part of what you were saying. So when you were discussing problems and solutions, and so I just remember seeing like a ton of very esteemed people just like with like on a certain podcast, they'll say like, oh, you need to take yourself out of the problem and then the solution will find, or just something along the lines of the solution is outside of the problem. And that's the exact opposite of the truth. It's looking directly in to what the problem is, and in doing so, and then just ingesting yourself with the truth or like the actual problem. When you find the exact true problem, that's when the natural solution will find itself. So the solution lies squarely digging deep into the furnace of the problem. And the issue is no one wants to go into the problem. It's like anything. It's uncomfortable, it's a mess. It's full of in some cases trauma or issues, or it's not a comfortable thing to do, but that is where you find the ultimate solution.
100%. And I think that's why we love this idea of prescribing answers to this. Like we want there to be an easy
Yeah,
solution,
exactly.
right? We want to be able to, I mean, it's like a medical issue. Say you've got, like you're really itchy. Like you want to be able to pinpoint exactly what is wrong. And the fact of the matter is that's not how you solve a lot of problems that go on in life, right? None of
Yeah.
these problems necessarily go away, but kind of like growing around them and being able to understand like the question, the answer to the question, to your point, is not the answer. The answer is the question. Like why exactly you're feeling these things. You look directly where they lie. You don't look towards this
Exactly.
outward solution.
To kind of give a metaphor for what we're talking about, so imagine you're on a boat and the boat's sinking. And so what we do as a society, when the water or when the water starts going into the boat, what we do is we get the little cups, you get little buckets, and you just start trying to toss the water out of the boat so you can stay afloat. And those are the solutions that we try to find. But the issue is that when you identify the actual problem, it might be that there's like let's say you're in an inflatable raft or something. Maybe there's a hole in the boat and or in the raft. So it's not about getting your buckets and tossing all the water out. It's about identifying the problem, that there's a hole in the raft, and patching it up. So therefore, that you have the ultimate solution when the problem is no longer there. You have a permanent solution. All these random solutions that we try to find that don't look at the problem, they are just band-aids, and they're not looking at the wound itself.
100%. I remember like I was like weirdly like really anxious at like certain points, and like I would try to like just look up like what are ways that I can deal with this, right? And they'd be like focus on your breathing or acknowledge that you're anxious, because then that acknowledgement then at least is like an acceptance of this, and then it'll go away. But the thing is like these things like it's not like then boom it goes away, right? To your point, like if I work on my breathing, these are just me taking a bucket, and throwing them out of the ocean. But what the last thing that's doing is figuring out how do I patch this thing up. Um, and I think that's something that we all struggle with. And it's very hard because to your point, I think we were talking about a lot about negative feedback loops. I think something that's a very positive feedback loop is like once you do kind of patch the boat and understand those underlying issues, aka some trauma or some pain or some really uncomfortable truths that you have to deal with, then you know what's front and center, right? Then you know what needs to change. There's the impetus to like, oh, this is what's been affecting me this whole time. Now I know what to do because you've done that internal reflection, right? So, and again, like that's how you kind of like can grow and grow as a person is like this is trying to find like the underlying truth, being able to then like unpack that and then trying to figure out like how can I use this? How can I patch up the boat, so to speak? And then, kind of bring full circle is like, then you realize you do things, right, that help with this, but you don't even like internalize. You just kind of start to do them because that's how your present state has now become.
100%. Yeah, I think you kind of summarized that in a pretty good lens. Um, yeah, so I guess to kind of take the conversation into like a different pivot, something that I guess I was kind of reflecting was, or a lot of like the writings that I've been doing has been surrounding upon like those high level performers um, and through the research and I guess reflection that I've done is we kind of mentioned in our last episode is sincerity is kind of when you remove all the layers of an individual and those people that are quite literally the cream of the crop and the best of the best, the last layer and the bedrock foundation is the sincerity because that's what they actually want to do. So I think the interesting question of how do I become the best in the world or how do I become a legend is quite literally the desire to become one, the true desire to become one. And if that's not the case, then like what if that's not the case and you're trying to get good, like you're just going to be searching for improvement. It's a shell game. Is that right?
Yeah, I think your last piece on improvement is something that I know is not consensus, right? Like we are very like grilled into this idea of improvement and marginal improvement and trying to just get better. There's like the classic like Malcolm Gladwell book, like Atomic Habits. Like if you just keep doing something like 0.5% every single
By the
day.
way.
Say what?
Oh, sorry, that's James Clear. But sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Oh,
off.
no, sorry. You're right. You're right. But anyway, so, and I think like it's a really interesting topic, improvement, because I think like it kind of goes back to what you're talking about is a lot of times, yeah, it's improvement that you see and you like want to try. Like a classic example of this is like weightlifting, right? Where it's like where you just kind of journal into, all right, now I'm putting, I'm stronger now. I'm doing 225 instead of 185, then I'm doing 245 instead of 225, and like that feels good, right? But like, does that really matter, right? Like
Yeah,
at
I
the end of
mean,
the day,
sorry. I mean,
yeah, go on. No, go on.
I just really wanted to kind of say a little bit because that was exactly like kind of what I wanted to allude to. That is because no matter if you can like lift like 135, like 225, 405, like whatever, or 395, whatever the case is, like that doesn't change anything. Like you're still gonna have the same problems. Like I mean, I mean, the only issue is, or the difference is just you're just a meathead with the same problems. So
So I am curious with you. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
but the thing is,
Go
it's
on, go on.
the last little piece is like it's no different than you have like being in an encyclopedia of knowledge or you painting all day or playing video games all day. It's all the same. It doesn't matter. You're still going to have the same problems that everyone else has. It's just the details are just going to differ.
Yeah, I mean, I think like how do I want to say this? I think it's tricky, kind of contextualizing improvement sometimes because I think like we talked a lot about like almost like kind of finishing goals or like to like get to the end of the road, right? And the way that we as humans track, say I want to I don't know, want to run a marathon, right? So I'm going to track like exactly how many miles I'm running, and so I can feel the improvement. Um, However, like at the end of the day, you'll like it doesn't matter if you run twice leading up to the marathon or 26 times before or 3 months before or 5 months before. Like you do whatever you feel like is comfortable, is natural for you to do to accomplish the goal. It doesn't matter your improvement in between those. And yeah, it's nice to feel like I am moving in the right direction. But sometimes you're not going to move in the right direction, right? What if you stop improving? What if you plateau out? Are that you then now going to like completely stop this routine because now you're not seeing that improvement? And I think like that's something that's also very easy to fall into a trap of, you know, you see like burnout a lot of like, God, now I don't want to keep doing this because like, but you've completely lost your sincerity at this point. You're becoming a slave to like your routine, or you're a slave to your improvement.
Well, it's a propagation of a self-image. So by nature, you when you contextualize and are conscious of the self, like we mentioned, you're always going to have problems and you'll never be enough. And so, kind of like how we started the conversation with competition, if you are stacking yourself up on the competition of people that are really performing well, it's you're going to feel some type of way. But the issue with
How do you mean?
improvement,
How do you mean?
well, I mean, the thing is like, let's say, here's a very real example. So, going back to your very first question, who is more competitive, me or you? I think, in my honest reflection of my basketball career, I think you probably performed like better than I did in most cases. And so I've always been, you always try to meet like a certain standard, or you try to meet your competition standard. And so in a lot of ways that can be a driving force, but it's not the most effective way to improve performance, because you, again, you are forever beholden on your opposition or your competition. And the moment I start performing better than you or excuse me, whatever or whoever it is, I'm gonna stop, because that is the essentially that is the goal. But people don't realize that's the goal, because they just want to feel good about themselves, and that is what improvement is. It's just so like when you're trying to like go to a destination, and obviously we are arguing and we think the truth is that arrival and the destination is by far the most important thing. And when you're going down the improvement rabbit hole, when you're like 60% there and you're tracking your performance and you're writing down like how good you're doing, it's you're just trying to feel good about yourself, honestly. And that's a slippery slope.
100%. And I think like, especially when you think about when you are like you're looking at this like external validation, right? Or like, oh, from like a competitiveness level of like, oh, now I am better than this person, right? And like you just like all the things you're saying, it's just like these things are all just tied to your ego. These things are all just tied to your own insecurity, right? Like you want to feel like you're doing something like positive, whereas like that's the exact opposite thing you should be feeding into, right? Like I think improvement is can very be like falsify your own image of yourself.
Exactly. I mean, there's honestly, there's nothing wrong with it. All I'm saying is that it's ineffective, and a lot of the times that is a source of some of your issues, and it's just a result of. I mean, I'm just calling it as I believe I see the truth is, and so it's just people trying to find a patch or a band-aid for possible deficiencies, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just calling it out, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think also just like the awareness of it as well, um, kind of helps you understand, you know. And again, to your point, it's not like if you track improvement per se, like that is a bad thing. It's just understanding kind of like the things that potentially feeds into. And again, like I don't, you know, you kind of said it earlier, and I just want to kind of double down and say, I don't, we don't want this podcast to be like these are things that you should do, or like this is how I view something, this is how you should view something. Like I think we kind of want to just provide these insights, right? And then if this is something that resonates, you can kind of unpack it and digest it and do it on your own time. And so I do like, because I know there's like at some points where I, like, because how I feel something, like this is how I view it to be truth. Um, but if there are things like improvement that do work for you, like it works for you, right? Like I don't want
Well,
this to
that's the
be like a
thing.
very
Like, yeah, I mean, like, who am I to like tell you like if you don't believe in me, like, I mean, I don't care what you do with this information. If it helps you, it helps you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We're not like that's the thing. Like, we're not here to help anyone. We're just here to have an honest conversation and just post it to the world. And I think it's just a fun for me. And I know we because we have these conversations all the time. It's just fun to explore these kind of things because for the most part, like no one is talking about it. And I think the reason for sharing it is because we just see like how wrong society is and like everything is wrong. Everything's prescriptionized, and it's just we would like to just share our 2 cents and of what we think is the truth. And um, I don't know. I think we had a really good conversation for the most part, and I know you were kind of asking all the questions. And um, but I mean, but yeah, I think it's about having a dialogue, and I think we might have mentioned it in. I don't know if I mentioned it on the last episode, but I know I like to say it's like I don't think truth is found in groups. It's found in one-on-one or minimizing the socialization with other people. And when we're in a forum like this and we're speaking together one-on-one, we're speaking honestly, it's a raw conversation, and we're able to then be our authentic selves without the subconscious social posturing that might be involved when you have like a mass group of people.
yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I think I just want to emphasize that as well. It's like something that, as I've realized, is I think people have this idea that like we're very social creatures, which like is true up until a point, but at the end of the day, like your thinking is your thinking, right? Your actions are your actions. Like, you know, how you ingest and like what you take in, it's only up to you. Like, so the truth of like how you think and how you operate, it involves you. Like looking for into a group for advice or perspective or just anything like, yeah, that can be helpful at times. It can be helpful to have just a lot of healthy sources of information. But at the end of the day, like there is some like deep critical reflection and alone time that does need to exist so you can figure out what does work best for you. Um, and yeah, so I want to think we've been kind of going a little. I think this is about right. But is there anything else you wanted to add? I thought we kind of had a good conversation here, and um, yeah, I think like competition also is just like it's very. I think where I also enjoy it too is because now I am out of competition. Like I feel like I have some sort of perspective, but then it's funny because I currently like yes I work out or but like my livelihood does not depend on my sport, right? And it never did in high school, but like I so it's fun seeing like how athletes kind of view their livelihood or like you can especially like in the PGA doc where you could see there's like the Joel Damons who's a guy who's probably like ranked 100th in the world who like doesn't care or seemingly doesn't care, but is like a really really good golfer. And then you have a Brooks Koepka who we mentioned earlier, who's a top 5 player in the world, who seems like it's scrambled eggs. And then he talks about Scotty Scheffler, who's number 1 in the world, and Brooks himself says like he walks around like a guy who does not think. There's nothing going on in his brain, and I think he's 100% correct. I think when you view some of these people where like you can just tell, especially, and that's why to bring it back, why I think sports are just very fascinating case study into all of this is you can really tell the unique and rare individuals because when they operate, you can tell they're unfazed by everything. They're just doing as is. They're present and they operate as so.
Yeah, two closing parts on my end. I think the first thing is you can you can see sincerity and authenticity. It's very easy to spot, I think, and especially in the realm of sports, I think it's a little bit different than maybe other avenues, but um, I think the point still remains. But what was the other thing I was going to say? Um, I don't know. I guess we might have to save it for another end, for another
Guess we'll have to save it
podcast.
for another pod.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, Benny, as always, thanks for your time here. I thought we had a really good conversation. To our viewers or viewer, um, thank you guys for listening. We do appreciate the likes or subscribes, or if you want to send it to whoever you want to talk to us about it, we're always open. So we just appreciate the dialogue. So thank you guys for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you, brother.